Electric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast celebrating the tracks by a musical pioneer.
So I thought it would be, before we start, really interesting for our listeners as well to hear firstly about your music background and, when did you discover not only a love for music in general, but for, electronic music and all that kind of thing.
Well, my love for music sort of started with glam rock, I
Mm.
suppose, really. The sound of the drums in a glam rock record. I didn't know what that was. I just loved it. I just loved what it was. I didn't know it was a drum kit necessarily double tracked and all the stuff I know now. But I just like the sound of good sounding records. And, never massive follower of a particular artist. Like I liked album tracks more than I liked
Mhm.
singles, oddly enough, even as a kid. But I didn't follow bands just because, I was obsessed with them. So it was just like flitting between great sounding records, everything from Suzi Quatro, Gary Glitter, The Sweet, and all that back in the day. And I think it was probably bringing it to synthesizers was when I saw Our Friends Electric on Top of the
Mm.
Pops. And I just couldn't believe it was seemed to be the same almost within a year. It was like Our Friends Electric. Then you saw John Fox doing Underpass, and then you
Mm.
saw, just that whole series of loads of synths on Top of the Pops. And I've been watching Top of the Pops like we all had, certainly from my generation, every Thursday forever. So I just heard it, and then my dad went out and bought me a synth that Christmas, like 97 or whatever it was. I was 79, sorry. And then just sort of started there, really, that passion for that passion for that sound, really, not
Mm.
ever being a particular fan when I was a kid of guitars at all. Loved drums, loved synths, and that was it, really.
So what was the first synth that you had that you got your teeth into?
SH09. And
Nice.
we bought it from Friedman's Music in Leighton High Road. Uh, we live right by this shop called Friedman's, and I was in there all the time, but I could walk there from home, so I was in there all the time.
And it must have been quite a learning curve back then as well, the kind of machinery and things I would have thought as a youth as well, to trying to like get your grips around those sort of instruments.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of, I don't know about a learning curve. That they were quite basic. They
Mhm.
could only play one note. I didn't know any chords anyway, so that wasn't going to be a problem. And then they were quite basic, and the kind of noises we were making are nothing like today. They're nothing as polished or as intricate as what we use today. And making these things, even when you went to professional studio, jumping forward a few years with these little box, everything was a box, not was no computers. Making them sync to tape, or making them the two drum machines work together and not drift. I mean, that was the art. The synthesizers were pretty simple. And as
Mm.
much as that thing behind me, which looks like the most complicated thing in the world, it's really, really simple.
Mm.
What it gets complicated is when they make a synthesizer with a little DX7 screen this big with 1 million functions in it, and that's complicated. This stuff's dead easy, really, when you get your head around it.
But yeah, so Gary though in particular was one of the artists that you saw as a youth and thought, right, this guy is changing things and he's doing something really interesting here.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really think of it like that. He
Mm.
is changing things. He was changing things and doing things different, but I didn't think of it like that. Just couldn't get my head around how it sounded. It just sounded unbelievable. And even today, I mean, it's quite sort of well known. I'm not really a massive fan of cars.
Mm.
I absolutely love Our Friends Electric. I like
Mm.
Cars; it's really good, but it didn't, and it's an amazing song, Cars, and it was a game changer for Gary and for most of his fans, I guess, and most of the people listening to Top of the Pops. But for me, that wasn't the notes, that wasn't the melody, that wasn't the vibe. Just Our Friends Electric just did something. It was just like a boom. That was that point. I wanted to do music from that one
Mm.
song.
And in terms of making music, then, do you remember what your first like project was, or remix, or what your first thing was?
What, professionally, like getting paid or?
A bit of both, really. Like, did you sort of do it for yourself at first, and then how did it
Oh
progress
yeah,
into?
I
Yeah.
mean, Christ, I was 9 years old, so yeah, I had a lot. I had a lot of doing it for myself. I mean, probably I don't know. It's like I mean, even when I zoomed forward to when I was 15 and I started working in Rod Argent's, where that's where all the
Mm.
sort of the professional side slowly come about from actually working in a music shop in Denmark Street and seeing the bands. But between that time and between maybe 17, so it was just experimenting with little bands. Like my mate had a drum set, and then another friend had a guitar that we used a bit, and we just mucked around really. I used to chop up, tape to tape, cassette to cassette, chop it up. There was no samplers. I mean, when the sampler was invented, I think the first time I ever heard a sample was Paul Hardcastle. I mean, he was literally lived around the corner from me. He was
Oh,
in the
wow.
same two music shops as me, and both our mums were Provident ladies, which was like a way for it was like a people who didn't have much money to borrow money really safely and cheaply. They both were Provident ladies, my mum and his mum back then. And yeah, I just started experimenting, and I wanted a sampler, but I couldn't afford a sampler, so I got a guitar pedal sampler. And it was just messing around really, and not following any musical theory, just making stuff that sounded good. No idea what key it's in, no idea anything. Just this sounds
Yeah.
good, and that's what it was really.
Well, that's similar to Gary, really. I mean, he's always said that he can't necessarily read or know music in that regard, but he knows what he wants and what it sounds like, and it shows that. I think he probably upset a few people back in the day when you needed to be like professional and all that kind of thing. They didn't
Well,
like that he
exactly.
was, yeah.
I mean, yeah, I agree, but I mean, it's like I've spoke to Gary about this at length because he's one of my he's a very good friend now, but
Hmm.
he's one of my one of the people, let me say, that helped me when I started doing film music, when I started feeling, am I out of my depth here? And I had some conversations with Gary about that whole, not being able to read or write music, or not really understanding all the scales. And I think we both come to the conclusion that we wouldn't do or have done the music that we do, that we work on, that we create, if we did understand it all, because those things aren't written down. Now things are changing. We're in 2024, and it is quite a lot of time has passed since Gary started, for want of a better word, as he sort of says, found a synthesizer and accidentally played it on a song. That there's many years now, so it's not quite the same. We all know now that you don't need music degrees to be the most successful. Hans Zimmer's not got a music degree. He's not done any training. He's the most successful film composer of all time. So, all of these things, and pop stars and, TikTok stars, and you can just pick up stuff and create, and that's the good thing. But, when you back then, I think, it was just learning to try and make things you like yourself and hope people like them. More than this is, the perfect song or the perfect whatever.
And well, before working with Gary, one of your early-ish gigs was with the Human League as well on their Octopus album, which I love that album. Tell Me When's one of my favorite songs. So how did that come about, and what was it like working with those guys?
So that came about with a long relationship with Ian Stanley. He was a producer on there. I was really the sort of programmer, and we eventually become partners, and we were co-producers for quite a lot of projects. But that started because I had a band called Amoeba Assassin, and I used to do the DJ mixing for the Essential Mix on Radio 1 for all the big DJs. So where it'd be like a 4-hour mix, I would do it on my Pro Tools, and I was one of the early adopters of Pro Tools, really, really early. I mean, that was a big game changer for me. I sold everything I had, and I bought a big Pro Tools rig. And I mean, back then, we're talking, I spent 14 grand. I only had a little flat in London. I spent a fortune on this Pro Tools rig and basically become the go-to guy. I saw it as the future. And I was actually doing the mixes for the DJs, making my own stuff, making white labels. And then my mate BT, Brian Trentso, I was doing a mix, and he said, I heard that track you did. I think it was called Roller Coaster at the time. Could you put it on the Essential Mix? I said, it's brilliant, thanks. And that was like Friday night, and Monday morning I got a call from Perfecto Records, they wanted to sign this track number 3. I knew Perfecto. I was doing mixes for him, and I said, "Oh, yeah, that's one of mine." And we couldn't and so they signed me, and I really got in with Perfecto and East West. And I was actually taking my Pro Tools into East West, into the A&R rooms, and doing edits for A&R men, and all that kind of stuff. And the next thing was, Chris Hughes was going to do, the guy Adam and the Ants producer and all that. He was going to do Human League, and that kind of didn't work for some reason. And then Ian got the job and said, "Andy, would you come up to Sheffield with me?" And I'd love it, because obviously I like Human League. So it just went there, and we moved to Sheffield and basically lived there in this lovely old hotel, and just worked endlessly on this album from scratch, really.
And just think of another project before we got on to Gary that is a bit off piece, but I'd love to know the story behind the Big Brother theme, just because in my formative years it was such a big thing, and that piece of music, you probably hear that more than most TV themes over the years. It's such a big piece of almost British culture almost. So I just wanted to know how that came about, because Big Brother wasn't a thing yet. So you wouldn't necessarily know what it was going to become and how influential it was going to be. So how did you tackle that kind of project, I guess, like if it came to you, like how did you, because it worked perfectly.
Yeah, it was, it wasn't quite as straightforward as just pitching that thing. I'd already been working on Amoeba Assassin. I've been working on this sound that's like, it's everywhere now, but that sort of Big Brother sound. I've been working on it for records and loads and loads of tracks. It wasn't just one thing. And then this film, I love Get Carter, the original, but this remake with Mickey Rourke and Sylvester Stallone come up, and I was already doing film stuff with Oakenfold. And so we did this thing. It's called Descent, the track. And, I use the word "we" very, very loosely. Paul has nothing to do with being in the studio at all. He's just the figurehead. And so I'd come up with this sound, and it was the noise of Big Brother noise, and I'd done it on a couple of Amoeba Assassin tracks, but very dark and very minimal. And it sort of become this thing that people were calling it progressive house, because it was more of a produced sounding house record. I was really into this Detroit house, which was minimal, banging, kick, snare, 303 type stuff, after acid house. And so it kind of got more and more produced, more and more film-like. And then it was one afternoon, it was like, there's this new thing coming on Channel 4 called Big Brother, do you want to pitch? There's 360 odd people pitch for it. I had this idea. I was babysitting my little girl at the time, Amy. She was underneath the desk, and I had this idea of moving on from this Descent and what I'd been doing with Amoeba Assassin, making it a tiny bit more popular. It was 13 minutes long, and then I chopped that down to the little sting that the 2 sections that from the telly, and then sent that in, and the management 140D, they're like, "No, we ain't sending this. This ain't right." Paul wasn't in the country. Paul wasn't anywhere. He didn't even hear it till it was after on the telly. And it was like, they're going, "This isn't right." I said, "Well, I don't want to do anything else, because I think this is really good. I think this sounds different." And I'd read the brief as well. The brief was uplifting, completely different, summary, something iconic. That's what there was, this big list of things to tick off. And I just thought it fitted it. It didn't sound like anything else. I know that, but I thought it fitted it. And I got invited to meet Philip Edgar Jones, who's the owner of Endemol. Again, Amelia Hartley is the music supervisor, but it's long before she was doing anything. So me and Philip spoke about it, and then that was it. It went on the telly, and I didn't know what it was. I just thought, reality show, what the hell is that? This is going to be rubbish. And I watched the first one, and it was actually, first couple of seasons were quite gripping, with like Nasty Nick and real characters. I don't know what they did with the show, and I still don't know what they do. I don't know if somewhere down the line they get people in to analyze, like, the people who are on the show now, and it seemed to have lost its, to me, it's lost its raw edge. But back then it was quite mental. People would stand up all night to watch it. The music was playing on loop. It was exciting.
I bet, because it was such a, in the early noughties in particular, it was everywhere. But it's come back now, and you still hear the music, and it's synonymous with it now. So in terms of Gary, I think I'm right in saying that the first time you worked with him, I might be wrong, was the remix of A Prayer for the Unborn. Is that correct? Is that the first track you did with him?
Yeah, I've not got great memory of all. I'm hoping you know a bit more than
Well,
me.
I'm pretty sure it is. I think it
I
ended up
think,
on the Exposure collection and then
yeah. So I
later on
think,
Hybrid as well.
yeah, exactly. Now, Prayer for the Unborn, believe it or not, was not what I was commissioned to do,
Mm.
because I did listen to my voice,
Mm.
which is super glitchy. So Gary's voice is really, really chopped up, and it's really, really dark and off the wall. And it was the first time I'd ever worked with Gary, and he was such a hero of mine that I was really worried he wouldn't like what I did. So I did Prayer for the Unborn as a bonus. I
Mm.
wasn't asked to do it. I asked for the audio and I did it as a bonus. And obviously it's the other way around. Everyone thinks Prayer to the Unborn was the thing. But I mean, I love both of them. I like both of them. I mean, uh, what's happened with Prayer for the Unborn now, it's been played so much. It's absolutely stunning. So like I
Mm.
go to a gig to see Gary and I hear that version. It's like, wow, it's a massive,
I
one
bet,
of my
yeah.
massive honors in life.
Yeah, well, I'd say your version of A Prayer for the Unborn is generally one of my favorite songs, let alone by Gary. And he has said himself it's his favorite. And as you say, you've made it better, and you still hear that at live shows now. Um, how does that feel when you heard how much he appreciated it? Like, because for him
Um,
personally, it's such a personal song to him as well.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I did know, I knew what the song was about. So I was
Mm.
very, very respectful. Well, it's music, right? But it's trying to, I mean, Prayer for the Unborn, that sound, that type of music, that's, you can hear it right the way through up until the latest mixes I've done for Gary. It's that, I love that vibe, that
Mm.
kind of bit, the drums aren't bang on and it's not sonically perfect, it's slightly baggy, but with, the cool dark builds and stuff. And I just thought it worked really well with that vocal. I just thought, um, you know, just works so well. I mean, it's like, listen to my voice. I've made that the opposite. It's very, very electronic, really, really tight and glitchy electronic. And then, you know, Prayer for the Unborns just seemed to want to be more organic. And it's quite amazing that, it feels amazing that I've heard it played so many shows, and he's one of my, certainly one of my biggest inspirations
Mm.
in the beginning to get in doing what I do now and what I've done for most of my life.
Mm.
And it was weird, when I met Gary, because I was asking my management. So how the first thing started, how did I even meet Gary? Was that um, I'd been listening to the odd songs of his over the years, but not really, I had a, because the thing is also, if you're working in music, you don't really listen to that much music because you just finish the day and put Radio 4 on or something because you want to hear someone talking because it's just music, music, music. But a good friend of mine, Mark Gilbert, he's a software designer. He just emailed me one day and said, "Oh man, you're going to have to hear. I know you like Gary Numan. There's this new album called Pure come out." He goes, "You're going to love it." And I went and got it straight away, probably on vinyl, can't remember.
Mm.
And I thought, this is incredible. I love this. And I know eventually turned it out. It was the Sulphur Boys did that. I still love that album. They had done it. And then I was asking my management, look, I really want to do some remixes from this album. Can you go find out? And, no, they couldn't get hold of him or whatever. And I knew Gary Robson because I used to work in Psycho years ago. And I knew Gary was his mate. So I kind of called Gary Robson and said, look, man, I just heard Pure. And he goes, yeah, I will get hold of Gary for you. Gary Robson will get hold of Gary Numan and try and put me in touch. And that was that. And not really much happened. And then Saffron from Republica was at my studio on a Friday night or afternoon. And I was just, we were doing stuff together. And I was just talking and I mentioned Gary Numan. She went, oh, that's my mate. I'm seeing him tonight at Brixton. Do you want to come? And I went, are you joking? She's like, no. I said, okay. I went and saw him that night. And
Mm.
then backstage, I walked past him, squeezed past him. And she'd already spoke to him about me and said, like, I want to do something. And he goes, oh, you're Andy Gray, aren't you? I said, yeah. He goes, I've heard you want to do a remix. I said, yeah, I'd love to. He goes, yeah, okay, great. What do you want to do? And I picked Listen to My Voice
Mm.
there and then. And I'd never spoke to him before. And then I went off to do Listen to My Voice. And then I did it. And I thought, this sounds really, really cool. I don't think he's going to like it. So I asked for the parts for Prayer to the Unborn, and that's basically how the relationship started, with those two things. And it started on a good foot, because Prayer to the Unborn was something that everybody enjoyed.
Yeah. And that must have been quite nerve-wracking, waiting for the response and hoping you don't.
Still is.
It's probably
Still
like that
is.
with anyone you work with, I guess. But yeah, particularly with him. And then, well, what is your process then for when it comes to remixing any song like that already exists and trying to come up with something new while still keeping the essence, I guess, of the original? Like, do you treat different artists differently in terms of how their music sounds?
Yeah, do. I keep it true to the original? I don't know if I do, actually. I think I don't know if you'd say I keep it true to the original, actually. I'm
No.
probably not the best man for doing that, because I kind of I think, whether it be for commercial reasons, for them to, sell more records, or become a bigger fan base, or whatever, syncs. Back then, it was a lot of the stuff I did back then was syncs, actually. So, there was music getting used here, there, and everywhere. But my approach is usually what's the heart of the song, a bit like doing a film. What is the song about? And then they've already done, in theory, I'm not doing a remix of something that's a pile of shit. So in theory, they've already done a good version. So I don't need to tinker with that.
Yeah.
I do get all of the parts. I don't ever just use, I do just use, but I don't ever just ask for the vocal. That's for sure. I want all of it. 90% of the time, I won't use any of the drums, but sometimes I'll chop bits of them up. If there's an amazing sound, let's say, like, I'm trying to think which one it is, but let's say on Gary Numan Absolution or something like that, where it's a big synth riff in the original. I think it's one of them, I'll get that, and then I'll think, yeah, actually, that's not as big as I thought it was. I'll make it, one of my jokes with my mates is that my sounds are more Numan than Numan. So I'm making a Gary Numan sound that I remember sounding like that. And it's sort of the memory of it, rather than playing it back and going, Our Friends Electric sounds like this. I remember Our Friends Electric, and I'll make my own version of it. And it usually is like on steroids, because in 1979, synthesizers were very simple, and now they're complicated. So so it's kind of, the process is always around the vocals. I may chop them up, but I will definitely, if it's a singer's, if it's a song with a singer, I'll use that. And then just build it around there, really. Try and keep it pedaling, simple. Prayer for the Unborn is on one, it doesn't really have any key changes. It's just one stagnant kind of pedaling D or whatever it was. I can't remember now, but just work like that, and then just work on sections. And I'm quite known for the wedge shape production. So it's like starts here and then it's big, or the other thing is like Dead Sun Rising, is it? I did as well. So that one, as a joke with me, Pete and Ollie, Pete Steer, it's like a lot of the things I do. It's a game. I hate football, but the expression, "a game of two halves," it's a game of two halves. I took it from football, where like the front of the song is completely different to the back. It's like, and a better analogy is what's that Quentin Tarantino film with the vampires? At Dawn.
Oh yeah,
Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah, Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah, like the beginning of the film is one thing, and the end of the film is like this massive horror killer. So that I kind of like that, just experimenting with a vibe, and then boom, taking it somewhere else, and then wigging out on that. So it's always about an immersive sound, really. That's what I'm looking for.
Well, we mentioned hybrid briefly, and again, I've always considered hybrid like a full album in its own right for Gary, not just a remix album. I think it's like a brilliant collection of updated new tracks, and obviously some new ones as well. And you worked on a number of tracks on that. So how did the process for hybrid work? How closely did you work with Gary on it? Because I think these were new vocals, weren't they? They weren't just like they were. So
no, it was new.
How did that project?
Exactly, the hybrid process started a little bit before hybrid. It started with Steve Malin's getting us together for a magazine thing. I'm not quite sure how that come about from that side, but basically we did this track called Ancients, and that was before hybrid. And that was like a co-write. And I had done a film called Time Cop, and at the end of the session, the live orchestra, I had like half an hour, and I had these chords, which are the chords from Ancients, which start the thing. And I quickly said, could you play that? And they played that, and I had it on my hard drive forever. And I sent it as a jobbing songwriter to all these artists, and everyone's like, oh, that's weird. I'm not going to be able to sing on that. And I sent it to get. So then when this thing come about with whatever Malins had sorted out, I just said, look, I've got these chords. And he's like, wow, I've got an idea straight away. And I played him the chords, which was real strings from Prague. And then he just sung the main hook, All I Want, whatever the first intro. And that's the relationship started there. And then zooming forward to Hybrid, virtually the same thing happened. I come up with some seeds of an idea. I'm not sure whether there wasn't, can't remember clearly whether some of the stuff, there wasn't vocals available because it was lost or multi-tracks with whatever. So I kind of sent bits over, and then some of it Gary would sing over that top of that. And some of it he would just sing to the original and then send me the vocal. And that's where it started. And it started with that, so we'd done a few bits together, and it started that I wasn't going to make his voice double tracked like he always has with loads of detune and delays. I thought, no, it sounded really cool, boom, up in your face, and more modern, and I'm moving forward. So we kind of got round, Gary sort of said to me once, I can't remember, it was a long time ago, he's like, yeah, I always have plus and minus on the AMS for the pitched vocal thing. I'm like, yeah, I ain't doing that. So because it just sounded like Gary Numan from back in the 70s and 80s, and I wanted it to be because his voice is so cool. That's the one thing about Gary. His voice is super cool. I don't like singers who can sing vibrato and perfect. I like singers that sing from the heart and sound amazing and different,
Yeah, no one else has
and,
a voice
and he did
like
sound
Gary.
different, and in mono, maybe not tracked, not too much tunings and all this stuff. It just sounded really, really cool. And that's kind of how that started, really. So then I started getting more and more tracks. They said, oh, do you want to do this one? Do you want to do that one? And I just picked the ones that I thought, that were my bag. I think there was one I did do which I didn't finish, and it was the one that Where's Your Head At eventually.
Oh yeah, ME.
Yeah, so I started ME. That's never been released, so I couldn't do that because of the dun, dun, dun. I was like, where can I go with this? So I tried. I couldn't get it dark enough, so that was the one I just said, look, give me another one.
Yeah. But there's, Our Friends Electric as well. That's that completely changes it, and in such a cool way.
That was hard.
Yeah, I bet that was. How did you take that on? Because that's such an iconic song as well.
That was really, really difficult, and fortunately, one of the guys at my management at the time, Justin, I played him because that was so close to me that I thought I should do it, and I did it last, and I struggled completely. I think there's 3 versions of that. The one you hear, I am happy with. But I did do 2 versions, completely finished before, that no one's heard. Maybe Justin at the time, the assistant at the management. And he just honestly said, I think you can do better to me. And I wasn't happy with it anyway. And I did 3 attempts. I don't ever do 3 attempts, but I honestly don't. I would say that's the only thing I remember rejecting my versions 3 times. And then that last one, I thought, yeah, I'm happy with that. But it was hard. It was really, really. I remember it being hard.
But the end result was really, really great, and the whole album, I think, just flows really nicely, even though it's different producers and what have you. But you mentioned Ancients, and I think, again, and not just saying it, it's genuinely top 10 for me in terms of all-time favorite Numan songs. I think it's such an underrated track. So I just wanted to know how, obviously, that you said that was before Hybrid was a thing. And it was a co-write, this one. So how did that come about, and what was the meaning behind the song and all that kind of thing?
Well, as I say, it sort of come about because Steve Malins had said, why don't you and Gary get together? It will be as far as I remember, I can't remember the name of the magazine. It was like a techie music magazine, and we were going to team up. And I didn't live that far from Gary, so he was in Stansted, around the back of the Stansted expansion. Now I think his house has disappeared. And I was in a place called Wempstead. So we weren't that far apart. We're both sort of Hertfordshire, edge of Hertfordshire. And so, we started this idea of a co-write. And then the next thing is, I'd already played him these chords, and I thought, why don't we build something around? I've always wanted to use these chords, which were the ones that I'd already recorded at the back of a film, Time Cop. And then Gary just sung on it straight away, and I just thought, wow, this is cool. And we didn't struggle for a minute. It wasn't hard. That just come about. And then the really cool guitar, that sleazy guitar. So I was working with this guy, Mark Ralph. He's a good, he's a big producer now, but I used to have a portable rig, everything in flight cases. I had a studio at home, but everything used to get moved job to job. And one of the drivers of the van was this Mark Ralph, and he used to work for Tickle Hire. And I didn't used to hire their stuff. I used to hire it was like a man with a van, but who knew music. And so I said, Mark, can you come up and play guitar? And I would play. I'm really bad on the guitar, but I can chop it up, and I just would be better. So I played him this kind of weird idea that I couldn't really pull off, and Mark was just nailed it. And that big thing I cut down to, it's like so sleazy, and that's the stuff I like. Real. It's not badly played, but it's almost like badly played. Lots of ringing notes and stuff. So I come up with that, and then come up with the strings was existing, and then once Gary's put his voice on it, I built everything around Gary's vocal, which he sent me. He recorded that, so I've never recorded the microphone in the room still to this day. He records in his studio, I record in mine, and we put it together. I love it though. I love that because I can work long hours or whatever I want to do, and it's much more much more creative for me rather than being put on the spot. But yeah, so that's how that sort of come about. And then I don't remember when it was released and what really very happened with it, but it's just one of those songs. I mean, it is quite a good quite a good song, really.
Well, you've as I say, you've collaborated with him on other things as well. There was the Hunters soundtrack as well, which was great, and I just wondered,
so
how
that's interesting. The Hunters soundtrack, so that again is just me and Gary co-writes. But what happened was the track For You, which I can't really remember why we did it, but we did a track called For You, and then one of my agents in the States got it synced, or presented it to the TV show Hunters, and so that was part of the roster that I had out there trying to pitch stuff. And then they come back to me and said that they really like it. The producer and writer and director of Hunters, they really liked it. And they said, could you do an edit? We need this, this, and this. And for the first time, I kind of said, I said, well, yeah, I can. I said, but because it was they can, these big TV shows can, or, sci-fi and all that, they can sort of get people running around doing lots of work. And so to make it serious, I said, yeah, you're going to have to pay for me to edit this, because the song existed and they can get an editor. They don't need me to edit it, and Gary's not going to edit it. So thank God I did, because after a week of doing a few edits and getting them on it wasn't Zoom back then, on a call, they'd already started writing the show. The score, episodes 1 and 2 had been started, and they weren't happy with the composer for the TV show. I didn't have the TV show. We just had what was going to be the theme. And what was weird on Hunters is that the opening is not the theme. So it started with you see it quite a lot now. It started like a minute or so of something happening. And then it cuts to 30, 40 seconds of this For You track, which is their theme. So I was halfway through this edit and getting it all going. And then one of the writers said to me, do you do film music? I'm like, well, yeah, that is what I do. This was the work I did with Gary on, we were doing something else. Actually, so luckily, because I've done a lot of film stuff, they wasn't happy with the person writing the score for Hunters. And they said, would you have a go at writing episode 3? And I wrote episode 3, and they gave me episode 3 to 13. And then by the time I got to 8, they gave me 1 and 2. So I did all of it. Yeah. And then, because in Hunters, they communicate with or communicated with. Eventually, Spotify got involved, but it was using 80s tracks for the aliens to communicate. It's quite a good show. But so eventually and I thought, wow, wouldn't it be a good idea to have, because we've got this For You, which was just out there. Again, I can't remember why we did it. There would have been a reason. And then I said, why don't we do an EP, Gary? So Gary was up for that. He was busy. So I was trying to write 13 episodes, which I'd never done in my life, back to back of music, which was Monday to Friday, delivering it Friday, start again Monday. And then I started doing these 3 or 4 other tracks that I thought Gary might like. And I sent them quite rough intentionally. So I just did a kind of framework. Gary would sing on it, and then I would almost treat it like a remix, work it around what he's done. So it was a real to and fro, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, there was a problem releasing the sci-fi release went wrong with Hunters, but it exists. It exists on YouTube. I didn't promote the thing on YouTube. My management were a bit rubbish about promoting it, the EP. But I like it. I think it sounds cool. I still like it.
That's great. No, it's a really cool little project and a way of doing it together as well.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a few questions from listeners as well for you, which would be great to go through. So firstly, Paul Anthony Fleming asks, love all the collabs you've done with Gary. Is there one song you feel, yeah, that's the best?
Well, it would obviously, no, maybe Ancients.
Yeah.
Probably. But
Yeah,
I love Prayer to the Unborn. I love Prayer to the Unborn.
Yeah.
But I do, that and Ancients maybe. Yeah.
Great. And Joseph asks, what an awesome guest. So many questions, but I'd like to know, seeing as he has had success with film and TV scores, does he feel that Gary isn't getting a look in, as any track from Savage would have been ideal for Dune or Dune 2 soundtrack? So I think Joseph's asking, do you think Gary could and should get into the world of film scores and things like that?
I don't think Gary wants to. I think I don't think Gary's an artist, and film scoring is not an artist's domain. I'm working for the film. I'm not working to make a song. But syncs, as in a sync, but you wouldn't get a sync in Dune, because Dune is everything's bespoke, right?
Yeah.
So if you're looking at something like Blade 2 back in the day, where it's full of chock-a-block, Gary should get a look in with that, because the stuff sounds really cool.
Yeah.
But if you listen to stories of like Trent Reznor talking about making the score for Social Networks, all on YouTube, and how it come about, you're to the whim of the director. And I can't speak for Gary, but knowing Gary, I'm not sure he wants to sit in the studio and be told, that ain't right, do that again, that don't work. And a lot of artists are like that. He's an artist, and as much as I'm an artist, sometimes if I'm doing my own stuff, you're at the whim of the film. I mean, I love being at the whim. I love being, up against it. But I'm not sure it's the world for everybody.
Great. And then Adrian Tudor says, Andy must be flattered, as we mentioned earlier, that Gary prefers his version of Prayer for the Unborn to the original. If he could work with Gary on one other song which is regularly on the set list, and which might even improve on Gary's version, which song does he think he would choose? We've already done quite a lot, so what else is left?
I don't know. No, I don't know. It would be very, very difficult to do, but maybe Cars.
Yeah, that'd be quite a challenge.
I speak out of turn. I never got my head around the version of Cars that was done on Hybrid, and still to this day I don't get my head around that.
It was very.
And I like that. I like that producer a lot. I do not understand that.
Very Halloween-esque, wasn't it? It was very
I just don't get it. It sounds like someone's just got a new sampler for Christmas.
So finally, I was just want to ask, what are you currently working on, and can we expect any future collaborations with Gary coming forward?
I would hope some collaborations with Gary at some point. Yeah, I would. Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly not against it. I like working with Gary. I'd love to have a project. Well, I've actually got a small project on the go at the moment. I'm considering speaking to Gary about, and I am. It's quite a way off, but I am working on a album of my own, which will be collaborations. It will not be super sexy synthesizers. It's going to be a bit more organic than that, but I will be talking to a lot of people, and Gary's definitely on the list if he would work with me again on something like that. So that could be something in the future. May not even be this year, because I may not get around to finishing it, but I've got lots of idea starters. But currently I've just released my latest project is No Way Up, which I can send you the links. It's the film that's just come out, and you can get the score. So if you want to hear my very latest, if your listeners want to hear what I'm doing with the orchestra and that side of things, there's not many synthesizers on it. My next project is a mini documentary about Alan Stansford, who is serving prison for 110 years at the moment for massive fraud, huge banking fraudster that brought the world to its knees to a thing. And what was interesting, maybe for your listeners, if they're into the synths, is it's going to be super dirty electronic, not orchestral. So that will be coming at some point, not in the near, maybe in the next 6 months that will be out. And yeah, that's the next thing I'm working on.
Awesome. All sounds really cool, really exciting. Well, yeah, thanks so much for your time, Andy, and thank you for being on Electric Friends.
Brilliant. I've enjoyed it. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Electric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast celebrating the tracks by a musical pioneer.